Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Dawson. Scott Allison, my producer here. We're members of the Heart of America Corvair Owners Association. And tonight we're going to talk about engine cooling, hopefully of interest to almost everybody. I don't know it all. I'm never going to know it all. We had lots of daily drivers in, but the fun part about it is we just keep trying to know it all. So I'm always working on it. If you think about it, if you got two items with Corvairs, you got oil changes and a cooling system. If you can keep both of those operating to perfection, you can probably amass some impressive mileages. I know you can. We're going to talk about stock cooling systems tonight. And I don't have experience or enough information to talk about modified race cars, airplane engines, things like that. So essentially, I'm just going to try to keep it basically for the folks that need this kind of help, and maybe some of the other folks will pick up something that it's just a good refresher. We're going to have all this information is going to be in a tech article, and Jeanette's going to load it on the CORSA website. So we're in the Midwest. You mentioned Kansas City. We have temperatures here in the hundreds occasionally during the summer, lots of 90s. So checking cooling systems, particularly with air conditioning, was something that I've been into for a while. I've got two air conditioned cars and a green wire fitted with temperature gauges. So with those installed is where I got a lot of my information at. So right before we get started, let me mention one other thing, and I'll probably mention it again later. Everybody, hopefully by now, realizes what the red lights are for, and that make sure you check them. They work every time you turn the engine on or turn the key on. You have to have your temperature light working and the oil light working. The key thing is that you can't drive with the belt off, not far, maybe to the shoulder, barely on the shoulder. So save the car, save the engine, a walk, a call, tow truck, anything's better than ruining your engine. And here's why. People have done this, I know, in my own experience. This ideal, one in particular, said he was going to tell his dad about it when he got home, that he had a light on. Well, he had both lights on. And what happens is you can ruin your engine to the point that it's basically a core. I mean, it's not a core, it's basically junk, because valve seats come out, upper head studs come loose, fan bearings come up out of the top cover, and cam gears come off of the cam. Most of those are because the interference fit between the aluminum and the steel. So that's something you're going to have to take into consideration if you've got kids that are driving, is just basically review all of that, because that's probably the most key thing, is to not let them overheat. Okay. If you think about it, Corvair engines expanded from 80 horse to 180 horse, and they didn't do much for cooling capacity. In the case of a 140 engine, it actually has less cooling fin openings available than the earlier ones. If you want to kind of snicker at it a little bit, the only thing they really did of any was that they changed the temperature sending units, the snap switches that turns your light on. They started out at 500 degrees, and then later they raised them to 585. I think there might have been a reason for that. I'm not sure. If you're going to work on this and you've got a new car, you've just gotten the car, you're restoring one or whatever, look at it like no telling what somebody's done before you. You really have to go through all of these things. Temperature gauges installed on the car would be a good thing. I love having it. You can check all kinds of things. In lieu of putting in a fairly expensive temperature gauge, you can just get like the infrared type guns, and check the exact same spot on the heads every time you pull out of one of your test periods. Well, Clark's Corvair Parts and some of the other suppliers sell gauges. I think Clark's is still selling Westac. And you can get online on the motorcycles. You can get on eBay motorcycles. You can find one of the old VDO gauges, a 310-901. These numbers will be in that tech article. Old Stuart Warner gauges are still showing up. Dakota Digital sells one. I've got a VDO, a Aircraft Spruce made a good one. It's called a Swift. It's a dual gauge, and I put one of those on my station wagon. It's a 140 automatic, so you can watch the heads to see if they're, now there's, we'll assume the gauges are reasonably accurate because I found out that you almost all read the same thing once you're out on a highway. So first thing you're going to do really is to make sure that your cooling system is functioning properly in its stock consideration. The most common cause of significant overheating is, like the first picture starting to show, cars that have been stored. If it's a barn find, if you bought it off another individual, obviously you don't have any idea where they may have stored it before you got it from them, even though it's in a nice clean garage now. Mice are insidious about doing that stuff. So, and that's the most significant issue in overheating. If you read the shop manuals, it was 4 years before GM ever made a note in there about deflashing the heads. And that's where we're headed with this, the first item. Deflashing those heads is really significant. If you look at this, the hottest spot is right down below that spark plug hole. And we're going to see some other pictures here in a little bit. These are extreme cases, but these are all unretouched. It's just the way the cars came apart. Finally, in 1964, Chevy came out with a note in the shop manual, and it finally says, and I'll read it real quick, says, inspect the cylinder head for restrictions in the air circulating passages formed by the cooling fins. Casting flash or a buildup of other foreign material that could decrease cooling efficiency can be easily removed from the air passages using a J-tool fin cleaning tool. So after 4 years, they caught up with them a little bit. Apparently the bean counter said, well, we're not going to have somebody at the end of the casting line cleaning out all that flashing. We've done some tests and it'll run hot maybe, but not that hot, not too hot. Well, problem is that flashing picks up stuff. And you've got to look at the fact that over 50 years, who knows what went down in there and is stuck on top of all the heads. I found stuff, everything from shop rags, tools. I found people's tools are dropped onto the fan and roll off into the heads. Pieces of fan belt. Plastic bags are particularly icky because they fly out of your spare tire when people put them in there for whatever reason and get sucked in there, and then they melt on top of it. And then, of course, the mice build their nests. This picture, I think, shows rear seat stuffing. Or that looks like house insulation in that one. But they pull stuffing out of your seats and then bring in dog food, acorns, you name it. So.
And that's the same engine.
The same engine, yeah.
Looks right. Try to start it.
You bought it from this guy, you drove it home, and there's what you found. So one quick note, if you clean up after the mice, some of that stuff is really hardened in there. Be sure and wear a genuine respirator, not just a dust mask. You have to wear respirators, some really nasty stuff that gets in lungs if you do that. Of course, when you're taking them off, taking the top cover off, you're also going to see things like what's in the oil cooler. With the cover off, you can see that, and you're supposed to clean those regularly anyway, particularly if you've got one of the folded fin coolers, because they really trap dirt and sludge and so forth. So what you're going to do is deflash the heads, take off the top shroud, and what you can do if you're not pulling the engine out, or you can take and get a stick with the LED lights on it and run the LED light stick in through open your thermostat door in the back, run the light stick in there, turn out your shop lights, and then use a keyhole file, rat tail file, small ones, of course. You can get some long jobber bits, I think, that are less than 1/8 of an inch to help drill. But get in there and clean all of the flashing out of that. Some of these, and there's what it should look like. There's that slide that shows that would be a 110/95 in the early models, not the 140. 140 is smaller than that, but that's what it should look like when you get through cleaning the flashing out. The flashing sticks out in there, and the cooling air brings in dirt, whatever, and if it doesn't burn off, and it probably won't, it's going to be stuck in there. So anyway, you're going to want to start doing that. Well, the one thing I ran into was that I've got a storage shed that I've got my own personal selection of heads back there that I do for various things. And I went through, I've got about 40 heads, and I went through about 20 of them looking for the fact that they had been deflashed by somebody in the last 50 years. I didn't find one, not even one. So apparently the only engines running around that have been deflashed is whether or not you've done it. So even if you've had your car for years, even if you got it from a guy that's selling it as a $10,000 concourse car, still need to pull that cover off and look at that. Hopefully I made that to where it's important enough that you'll get that high on your list of things to do. Okay, lots of little things can add up. Okay, keeping the belt on and tension correctly obviously is important. It's not slipping. Check for the proper belt length. 56, usually what you get now is 56 by 3/8 belts. If you use a 7/16 belt, there's some more pictures of the slots that you've got to clean out. If you get a fatter belt, a 7/16, it fits up, rides up higher in the pulley. You may not get it straight down over the harmonic balancer or the pulley. You want to lay or take a measuring device and measure your pulley on your alternator. Now, generators didn't seldom had this problem, but rebuilt alternators out of the box will come with small pulleys on them. You have to change your pulley. You cannot use a smaller than a 3-inch pulley. Otherwise, since it's not adjustable, the angle of your belt coming up is going to be way off. So that's something you want to do. Now I want to show something real quick. I'm going to stick it on the table. Or is what the height is of the fan bearing. Make sure it's installed properly. So what you got, see if we can show that. Okay, this works on all cars for the standard, other than the 60/61s, take a good straight edge, lay it right on top of the pulley. Okay, and it's measure down right next to the carburetor on the left side is the easiest place to get to, on top of the sheet metal. Okay, lay it right down on top of that. It should be exactly 6 inches for all the engines except for the 60 and 61s. Theirs was a little higher. I would say that what you'd want to do is use the late model measurements. I'm not quite sure that the difference is simply 5/32 higher is what it turned out to be. So next thing to look at, your lower shroud exhaust air doors have to work right. Those things over the years, a lot of them get backed into curbs, they get back into things, and they get bent and they pinch the exhaust doors so they can't open and shut. Easy check is just simply grab the top of the little doors, pull them open. They should come in totally vertical or totally horizontal and then snap shut. And watch the sheet metal on both sides of the little doors because they get pinched, bent. Get them adjusted properly. The doors start to open between 200 and 205 degrees, at least that's what my research found, which means that on a highway, coming off the highway, if you jump out and look quick, they'll be open. But as soon as you start cruising around town and drive back to your garage, get back, you're probably going to find the doors are closed again. If you had a temperature gauge on there, you'd see that your head temperature has dropped way back down. So, and of course, the left side may open just a little bit faster than the right side because it has a longer exhaust log in it. It's got the oil cooler over there. I don't know if that makes that much difference. You want to have all of your engine cooling sheet metal. It needs to be in place for the cooling part. If you got a dune buggy, of course, you're not going to have every piece of shrouding, but you want all of the ones that keep the air in the engine. Okay, those all got to be in there and seal any of the leaks around the top cover at the heads. I found some of the sheet metal. I think it must be a change in between years where you put late model shrouds on an early model engine or vice versa. There'll be a little gap up there. It's a little hole, but again, you're looking at a whole bunch of little things by the time I run down my little list here. So if you add up a little bit out of everything, it can make a difference. Your engine to body seals needs to be in place. Every once in a while, you can find they've ripped out all the early model seals around the engine for whatever reason, or the late model seal has gotten brittle and come off. Those need to be on there simply, well, it keeps exhaust from other cars and so forth from getting into your engine compartment quite as easily. Of course, it's still going to come in your vents, but you want to have the spark plug boots have to be the correct boots. You want your dipstick grommet in place. It's amazing how much air can come out of some of those holes. and then 63 to 69, there was a little seal around your vent tube from the bottom coming up through the shroud. A lot of those are missing, and it's not a huge hole, but it's still leaking air out of there. So again, and the fresh air duct on the top comes off the top of the engine for your what you're looking at is like spring and fall operating without the heater on, but fresh air for defrost. Okay, that comes off right above number 5 cylinder. You want to make sure that those hoses are all intact and in there. Theoretically, I didn't think it's an issue as long as you have all the parts there. Make sure that your late model hose isn't broken, underneath the body to where you can't see it. Otherwise, you're going to be losing part of the cooling air at that end of the engine. The vent tubes need to be cleaned. Engines will run hotter if you start plugging up the vent tubes. Pretty soon they start blowing oil out of places. So make sure you can use a frayed speedometer cable. That's what I like to use on a drill if you want to. Take a vacuum cleaner or metered shop air, put it in your oil filler hole, put light to moderate shop air or vacuum cleaner. And as you rotor the vent tubes, it'll blow out the little pieces, make a mess, but you'll get the stuff out of there without dropping it down onto your baffle on the inside. The oil, that's a big thing too, of course. Oil does 3 things. It lubricates, it keeps it clean, and it cools. So you want to use the correct oil for your car for whatever your particular driving habits are. All those be taken in for oil selection. And of course, there again, you can't adequately cool a wore out engine. You'll be struggling with it a little bit if you do. The air deflectors that go in underneath the cylinders, those have to be in there. People get seal jobs done, and for some reason, they won't put them back in until they realize they're still in the pile on the floor and they've already done the push rod tube, so leave them out. I've seen them cut up into 3 pieces and then beat up in there because they didn't want to take the tubes back out. So they got to be in there. You need them in there. If you look at it, how the cylinders are designed so that there's more fins at the top and less at the bottom. They're kind of tapered because of the heating. They're trying to cool it evenly, and the baffle or the deflectors in there to try to keep more of the air going over the aluminum cooling fins. So the heat shields, if you got dual mufflers, I think you can buy one or you can make one, heat shield for the left muffler too. Make sure your heat shields are on. Particularly look to your car to see what somebody before you, they may have a different muffler and they've got it rotated around where the end of the muffler is right up against the valve cover. So watch for stuff like that. The oil cooler cover needs to be in place, or with a clean oil cooler. Put side plates on your oil coolers, 8 plate and 12 plate. I know the 12 plates I make my own 8 plates. You can make your own, you'll need to make up a pattern, but you can use a 12 plate as a pattern and just make it to fit an 8 plate. The 8 plates work great once you put them on. You do get a little extra cooling. I got a chart later that shows, I think, the difference in temperature for oil cooling, not for head cooling. 8 plate folded fin, of course, has its covers part of it, so you don't need them for that. The recirculation plate in the back, you need to have it installed for summer. And earlier Corvairs had, a lot of them had, there were several different designs to where they had recirculation to keep the carburetors from icing. And some of them were just bent flaps. So you'll need to make sure if yours has got bent flaps, either fabricate a recirculation plate, maybe drill a hole or two and a sheet metal screw to hold them on. But anyway, keep the plates on, and particularly in the summer, get them covered. For the automatics, one other piddly little thing, a small item, is simply the converter housing has got an access slot to get the converter unbolted, and it's got a little cover that pops on there. Well, that's part of the cooling of the converter, is air recirculating around. It's got a little, which I guess you could call it like almost a fan as part of the converter on the back of it. Well, you're letting out some of the air there instead of making it go down all the way around. And out the bottom. So anyway, little stuff like that. Look for bent exhaust pipes and bang your muffler for loose baffles in it. A restricted exhaust will make them run hot as well as poor performance. If you have any question about your muffler, take a vacuum gauge, hook it up to the full vacuum, either off your crossover tube in the back or through PVC, whatever you've got, PCB. Hook the vacuum gauge up and then rev the engine up, slowly rev the engine up. Okay, your vacuum should start slowly to rise up with the engine. If it's got a restricted muffler, it'll go the other way. So you can check on that. If you got a green wire, not all of the vans had this, the FCs, but the green wires, and I don't think the 95 vans did, core vans. I think it's just the green wires. Anyway, they put insulation in there for noise to keep it out of the engine compartment or keep it out of the passenger compartment. Well, insulation came loose over the years and rolled up, and it drops down, it plugs up your air intakes. So if you have a green wire and haven't noticed that or looking at them, want to take a look at that. Okay, move on to carburetor work. Believe it or not, there is a lot of cooling that can be an issue caused by carburetors. They have to be balanced at idle, but they also have to be balanced off of idle, because as you go down the road, as you step down in the gas, if they're not balanced right, one of them's trying to accelerate at a different rate than the other one. So not only you get poorer performance, worse gas mileage, the cars will run hotter. So the balancing part, the picture there is a unison. You could also use vacuum gauges. Corvair has low vacuum, that's its inherent. So you would generally not use it for idle. Unison works good for idle. Vacuum gauge works good for, two vacuum gauges works good for the off idle. Those are screen door turnbuckles that I cut for different applications. You hook it over your accelerator linkage and then hook it over your gas line and adjust it to hold your idle or to hold your RPM in the off idle position. So once you step down the gas, those two screws you adjusted your idle mixture or your idle speed with no longer applicable. So then to adjust your carburetors to get them balanced off idle, you take your vertical link on the left side and adjust it up or down until you get the same reading. If you use two vacuum gauges, it would just be a matter, you can use one vacuum gauge and two hoses and pinch the hoses. But you need that balance off idle. That's really important to keep the car, particularly if you're going to drive them on the highway and take trips and everything. The other thing you have to do in conjunction with it, there's a picture of it being hooked up. Another thing you need to do in conjunction with the balancing off idle is to use make sure you've got all your links on the carburetors for, can you show this one just a little bit? Yeah, things you need to look at and think about is that your accelerator cross shaft is being operated from the left side. So you have to make sure that one carburetor doesn't lead the other. And one of the things that contributes to that are the throttle shafts. They come loose. This is a stock throttle shaft. This one has been brazed. They come loose and they're rotating on here. So your accelerator linkage lifts up, but the shafts don't rotate. So one carburetor leads the other one. One runs lean, the other one runs richer. So you can braze these, they're dissimilar metal, or you can get a Clark sells one replacement. You grind off the end and replace the entire shaft, which tightens it up along with other things. And you use your old lever, and they have a screw that holds theirs on. This works just great. It's a nice thing. The other thing you can do is when you're doing a pair of carburetors, these are symmetrical on both sides. So these two holes, this would be the left side, that'd be the right side. You can turn it around, put it on the other side, and now you've reversed it. So you can use the opposite hole if one of them's worn, simply by switching carburetor side to side. You want to make sure that these links that fit in these holes, this is what's making your balance work properly, is to have these links tight on both ends. This is the one that's adjustable. It would fit on the other hole like so. Always want to make sure that these are tight. This is the one you'd be doing your adjustment on. And the point is so that when that accelerator rod comes up on your left side, it opens both cards exactly the same time. Okay. There's lots of little vacuum leaks that you can spot on there, and anything that's a vacuum leak is leaning out your mixture. There's base gaskets, balance tube hoses, vacuum advance ports, vacuum modulator hoses, choke pull-offs, PCV valves. And you really want to do your carburetors for best in the Midwest anyway. The best thing we find is rejet them to 52 to 55, depending on, you know, what your preference is. And you might have to try more than one size, but they work really well, a lot better in the Midwest. And make sure your float level's right. You'll wind up with carburetors with float levels that are out of whack or vacuum leaks, and they make cars ping. So a lot of the times you might be blaming part of that on overheating, whereas part of it's just by a lean mixture, but in the end, you're going to wind up adding heat to the engine. Just make sure that all the parts between the carburetors and the specs match. If you got hot idle valves, 64 up, make sure that they're open at idle and closed off of idle. Distributor work, same thing, distributor shaft itself. So check your vacuum advance. Now, of course, be aware that vacuum advance is only on there for gas mileage. Vacuum advance, once you're stepping down on the gas, it's doing nothing because your vacuum drops off unless you have a turbo, of course, and then it's different. It's a pressure retard. It's waiting for pressure to work. You can have a vacuum leak through your vacuum advance too. So make sure it's working properly. Make sure that that you've got the distributor specs or for your engine. I looked at one not long ago that right off the bat, it looked like that they had a 95 manual transmission distributor and a 110 power glide. And boy, there's a big mismatch there on what the curve is. So granted, with our gasoline, your curves are going to be different in different situations. Different engines, you're going to have different curves. So you're going to have to do it with what gas that you've got available. But again, make sure that all that stuff works, that the curves are correct. You can get, they have published advanced curves. Clark's has got them. And use a tachometer and a timing light and check your performance. Oil coolers. Okay, got several choices there. The one on the left, of course, is the old folded fin, the early ones. Those were probably really expensive to make. And then we dropped back and we had the, on the low horsepower engines, they had that little 3-plate. Then they went to an 8-plate and then they went to a 12-plate. If you want to increase your oil cooling capacity, you can put a 12-plate on virtually all of them, but you do have to do a couple of modifications. And let me mention what you'd probably be looking at. One is the
Hey, Scott, hey,
cooler. You need a 4-inch bolt to replace it. The new cover is bigger. You need the box underneath that the cooler sets on. Otherwise, you're going to restrict it if you put an 8-plate box on a 12-plate cooler. So you need to do that. And then the last thing that you have to do is cut the 2 ears off right here. Okay, there's a little projected piece on each of these in the 8-plate coolers. The 12-plate cooler, you have to come in and cut that off. And that's where this fits back on there. So that's something else that you can work with if that suits you. That's available. Usually there's lots of used parts. Probably one of your local guys in your clubs have got lots of used parts around that you can. And I mentioned putting on the covers on them. Okay, the oil coolers, I mean, removing the lower shrouds in the summer, it does lower the engine temperature. I've seen a lot of different things about it. I tried it on my Greenbrier, drove it both ways at the same ambient temperature on the highway with a plate with the shrouds on and off. And my temperature gauge showed that it was almost 40 degrees difference in it. Now I've seen others saying about 25 degrees is closer. And I've even seen some people claim that they got 70 degrees out of it. I don't know quite how you get that much, but initial warm-up time's longer if you take your lower shrouds off. If you do all these other things that we're talking about, I found out I don't need to take my shrouds off anymore, even with running the air conditioning. 350, 375 on the highway with the air running is about as high as mine gets. And I've confirmed that more or less. You whip over, leap out and run up there with my little infrared and see what the heads are. So even though it's cooling down quickly, why it's still, I felt that we're pretty close on that. In the heat of the summer, I think the gain in lower operating temperature would probably be worth a trade-off in that you're going to have, the chokes are going to stay on longer and your engine doesn't warm up as quick, which is kind of a trade-off because that's one of the beauties of an air-cooled engine, warms up really quick. If you leave the shrouds off, then it's a lot slower warming up. You get a little more oil dilution, maybe a little more engine wear. Be sure that if you take the lower shrouds off, the choke coils on both sides are held on with little rivets. A lot of times, somewhere in the past, somebody's knocked those rivets out for whatever reason, and then the screw that holds your shroud on has to hold the choke coil back up. So you want to look for that. I try to avoid using extended tip spark plugs because actually what they're doing is they start the flame fronts closer to the piston. Now, some people want to agree, some disagree. I always felt like the engineers would have used an extended tip if they thought it was a good idea, but they never did. The aftermarket people, Champion, I think UL15Y was the one that they were selling regularly. But anyway, I don't know that that makes a difference one way or the other. I just thought I'd mention that you can still get like Autolite plugs, a 425 plug. All of them are missing that one thread, unless you find your old FF plugs. But the Autolite 425s, and I think you can still buy 44Fs. And again, it's just missing that one thread. If you have an air-conditioned car, be sure to clean your condenser. Obviously restricts. If you've got a 66 condenser and later, this is my idea. I picked it up from somebody. I think it was in the tech guide. Sorry, I don't have anyone to give credit to, but this was years ago. Modify the air cleaner so that it's pulling in cool air for the engine combustion in front of the condenser instead of having to pull all the heated air through the carburetor. So that's just a thought. One other thing, I just tacked this on here, but be sure that the fuel inlet line on the left side of the engine, even if you're running a electric fuel pump, make sure the left side of the engine fuel line isn't touching the head. They can be bent down during installation or whatever, and they're laying on the head. Well, that adds a bunch of heat to it. And you can actually, if you have the old stock fuel pump, you can actually boil the gas in it. Well, you don't boil the gas, you boil the ethanol. I took drove out on the highway, came back, leaped out with my temperature gauge and checked the top of the fuel pump. In other words, I'd feel like I was pulling into a gas station. Checked the top of the fuel pump. It was right at about 140 degrees. Came back about 10 minutes later and it was up to 180. So alcohol boils, ethanol boils 173, I found out. So you're looking at a heat soak thing. The fuel pump's cooled by gas coming into it all the time. But when you shut the engine off, all that latent heat in the heads soak up into the pump, which I verified with my little temperature gun. So that's and another thing I just want to mention, air cooled for those brand new folks, your air cooled engines are going to run hotter under acceleration at high speed going up a hill than they are when you're in a parade. In a parade, they all cool back down and they'll idle along just comfortably as can be. They do not overheat in the parade. We get folks that say, the light came on in the parade. Well, it's the same light that illuminates for the temperature as well as your oil pressure. So what happens is when that happens, You've either got really thin oil, maybe you got gas in the oil and it's thinned out quite a bit. It could have a bad pressure. The pressure that it takes to turn those switches off is all over the place. You can find them anywhere from like 4 or 5 pounds clear up to 12, 14 pounds. So you need to kind of take that in consideration. But the worn out engine would be your last thought on that. If your light flashes on and then goes off at idle, when you rev up the engine, it's not overheated, it's got low oil pressure. I looked in several sources, different folks. The only person I read about that he actually confirmed this was Bob Ballou, that the 61 to 63 fan moves the most air. He said that Bob, if any of you ever read Bob's stuff, he and I used to correspond a little bit. He would make up all sorts of different devices to measure things, how much oil goes to the oil filler, how much air goes here, whatever. Anyway, he actually measured that, and he said it takes 7%, it moves 7% more air in those 61 to 63 fans. But of course, the 64 to 69 uses the least power and it's easier on the belts. Other things you can do are fin pans, valve covers, special paint, modified heads, remote oil coolers. If you do all these other things, I found that I haven't needed that. That's why I wrote all this up, because I really don't. The paint business, I try to understand it as much as, because you get different opinions of it. It says that convection cooling, such as your fan blowing over the engine itself, works best with unpainted rough surfaces. Radiation cooling, such as valve covers and oil pan, benefits from black paint. Driving down the road does produce some airflow, so there's some convection cooling too. Temperature switches, here they are. There's 3 different snap switches used. The first one was set for 500 degrees and it had smooth hex head flats on it and coarse threads. And the second was set for 575 degrees. That's because they didn't tell everybody to clean that flashing out, I think. And it had a notch on the flats. It had coarse threads and were used for all the engines except the 140 and 180. Those had a thermistor located in the left head, and the right switch had fine threads on it. It was also set for 575. The 140 engines in a Monza also had a snap switch with fine threads. Okay, I mentioned that earlier. Don't continue to drive a Corvair without the belt, period. You can actually turn it into junk. Okay, some of the stuff that I want to look at, again, I got this out of the Tech Guide a while back. A gentleman named Milton Binion, he submitted this article to the Tech Guide. I didn't take the time to follow up and check all of it, but if you just look at the heads, not much doubt in my mind, he was right on the money. The change in the larger valves, of course, necessitated smaller engine slots, I guess, to have enough room. And the increase in performance, and 140 is going to run hotter than the 80 to 110. They actually measured those things. They had the number of slots in the 95 said was 62, and a 140 only has 58. Not a lot of difference, but the length of the slots, there was 29 inches in the 140, while there was 39 inches in the 95 110 engines. And then the big item was that one that's right next to the spark plug. I don't know how many times I've had top covers off and found acorns sitting in there. And of course, that's one of the big heat spots. So digging those out is pretty significant. Okay. If you want to learn all you can, there's the 140 and the 95 110 side by side. If you want to learn some more about the heating and everything, cooling, take a look at the SAE papers. They got 3 of them out, and there's sections on cooling in there, which I've read, and they do provide a lot of technical answers to questions. Now, granted, this is technology from the 50s, is what we're reading when we read the SAE papers. But there's 3 of them out. One of them is on the initial design of the Corvair period, the engine, and then the Greenbrier, and then the turbo. So there's some fascinating reading on the Corvairs. I would get a copy of that and let you advance yourself into what their mindset was at the time. The chart that's up there now is the one that Bob Helt printed. And he said it was taken from the original GM test results. So the first 4, of course, is how much added heat you get. So to offset that, you need to do something. In other words, if you air condition them, air conditioning at 100-degree ambient temperature raises at 30 degrees. If you got a 66 style condenser, raises at 35. If you change fans, you can actually drop the temperature down. Not temperature, I dropped the temperature down because of the airflow change. So the 12-plate cooler changes oil temperature, but not necessarily head temperature to any extent. But it's better easier on your oil, isn't there? Doubt about that. If you just do something simple like add your oil cooler side shields on it, 10 degrees. They say louvers and lower shrouds. I don't know anybody. I haven't seen any louvers, and I'm sure there is. Somebody has made some, maybe. But if you take the lower shrouds off, it's showing 24 degrees and different speeds. The faster you go, the hotter they're going to run. And no much doubt about that. So, kind of summing some of this up a little bit, the key thing I'd like for you to take away from some of this is the fact that if you're a new owner, you just bought the car, and you're still learning about Corvairs. We got members of our own club that have just joined, and they honestly, a lot of them are retired folks, and it's a project for them, but they honestly aren't familiar with air-cooled engines. So sharing this with other members in your club and talk to them about what they can do and get them resources to investigate this stuff. Ideally, if you got the car and you haven't done anything to it, except it's shiny, it looks good, it got delivered, you picked it up, so far so good, make a checklist, maybe use this guide you download from the CORSA site, and go down there and see if you can check your temperature, put a temperature gauge on it, for instance, and then start. You may not need to do anything. Maybe somebody before you has done everything right. That's not likely, but it's possible. But go through there and check all those things and look at the under the top cover. That's the key thing. I've asked people about that, and they say, well, no, I've got it, and it doesn't seem to overheat. But then once they pull that top cover over, and there's all the stuff. So make it easy on your car and get it to have a little bit longer life if you'll do that. Well, anyway, that's kind of, I don't know if you've got some questions that I can maybe expand on a little bit on some of what I've learned with the air conditioning. 2 cars with air conditioning, I mentioned, I drive both of them regularly. Wife drives one all the time. Air conditioning works great. We're using the old GM compressors, still got R12 in it. So that's how I based all my numbers on the 350 to 375 with air conditioning and automatic in the summer in Missouri. So.
I have one question that was emailed to me, and then someone did just put a comment. Oh, here we go. I didn't catch all of it. It just said some owners spray their cylinders with black paint to keep them from rusting. How much would paint affect the cylinder?
From what I understand, it said that the information I looked up, it said that the black paint would be, they said that the best thing is unpainted surface. The original unpainted surface gets rid of the heat as long as it's a rough surface. I think if you got black paint that's designed for that, they got all these new space age things, stuff they use on the space shuttle. They got ceramic coatings to put on your push rod tubes. There's all kinds of stuff. If you just do some research on it, to what that paint does and how it's handled, it's very possible there are some good products out there that you could paint all that stuff with. I'm not familiar with them. I would recommend you do a little research. Again, I was trying to deal with, all my stuff has been dealing with a stock car driven under normal everyday conditions in Missouri. So do some, there may be the Corvair forums, a lot of them have really good information specifically, if you're having a race car heating problem or something, somebody has come up, they use vertical fans, keep throwing belts and all. There's a lot of good stuff out there. What you need to do is just get in with folks that are into the same thing you are. And it doesn't take you long. All you gotta do is find one guy and he'll put you in touch with somebody else. So share the information, folks.
Yeah, it's a great community for that. A good plug for the forums too. Again, I just want to remind folks, if you do have a question, go ahead and put them in the chat. There is one that came in the email, a person who lives in a congested city and their Corvairs have tended to run very hot, especially in summer when the AC is running full blast. They say that the Corvairs are both a 69 and 66 Monza with 110 and Power Glide. And he talked about some improvements that he did, but the solution that works best is water spray cooling, where they have a pump and a water tank and a hose with misting nozzle pointed to the fan area. And when the oil temp gauge reaches a certain temperature, they flip the switch and the system sprays a fine mist of water into the fan area. Would you say this is a viable solution? They're doing it.
Experience with that one. I've used water injection on way back when we had poor gas quality before they got it sorted out. And I used water injection to cut down because we were pinging all the time trying to run on regular gas. But since then, they've improved the gas. Spraying water over, I'm sure that's guaranteed to rust everything. It's not painted inside there, all the cylinders. So anything that's iron or steel in there is going to rust. And it rusted the carburetors. My water injection that I installed, everything on the carburetor rusted. Inside, the throttle plates rusted, choke plates rusted. So adding that to it, I don't have any experience with that. And again, see if there's somebody in one of the Corvair forums that may have done that. It may be, but again, hopefully, did he say where he was at? What part of the country?
Actually, New York City.
Yeah.
Sitting in traffic.
Hotter there than it is in Missouri.
True, true. Well, good advice on going to the forum. So, okay.
Yeah,
So here's a question that I actually always wondered. Does it help to lift my engine hood when I can after a drive? So you see that a lot of times people end their drive and they pull in and they lift up their engine hood. Does it help?
I don't know that it would. It might, particularly if you're thinking about that hot restart, maybe if it's super hot out. Again, you're letting the heat soak is what heats that fuel pump up. So that might help that
Cool it down a
restart
little.
issue.
I
Okay.
do know the Wichita Club does that
Do they?
for,
Okay.
to prevent vapor lock.
Yeah, Scott said that
Paper.
one of the local Wichita club, I guess when they take tours, they do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they take tours and they all jump out and do that. We even had years ago, and we had a lot of trouble with vapor lock. One of our guys carried a thing of water in his trunk. And it was just standard procedure when he left anywhere. If we took a tour, got gas, first thing he'd do is go out there and pour water on his fuel pump.
Wow.
Well, you can pretty much, if you just took the inlet line loose to let atmosphere into the line and then hook it back up, then you'd be restarting like you had an empty gas tank, like restarting it. The problem with the vapor lock thing is the pressure forces the fuel back into the gas tank. And then the pump isn't going to create enough vacuum to overcome that. So that does it help? I'd say it can't hurt. It doesn't hurt anything. And you need to check your belt harmonic balancer oil level anyway when you stop.
Okay, here we got a bunch of questions coming in. This is great. Everybody's with you here. Where do you check your head temp at?
I try to do it. I just do it. And I don't have anything apart on it, don't have anything pulled off. I just do it right next to the carburetor on either side on the sheet metal. Just take the head is right there at the sheet metal on that side where the head mutts up to the cylinders. And you can shoot it there as close as you can. And that's, you're looking at something that's relative at some point. In other words, you can check, is one side running leaner than the other side? For instance, if your carburetors are out of balance and you use that heat gun, you may find that they're out of balance just from the temperature. But yeah, just check it on as close as you can get to the head. You can see pieces of the head exposed and just check exactly the same spot every time. And you could get under and shoot up underneath or up in through the, but you want to make it, if it's overheating, you'll find out pretty quick just from doing that.
Okay. Here's another question about where things should be. Should there be 2 temp gauges, one for each bank of cylinders? Exactly where should it or they be measuring?
Well, yeah, what I did, most of mine, I put a dual temperature gauge. If you ever see aircraft spruce has them, and it's a gauge, round gauge that has 2 needles and they're crossed. And one needle is going up and down this side, the other needle is going up and down that side. And there's 2 wires and 2 sending units. And it's quite a bit of work doing that, but I did it just to do it because I wanted to put on the temperature gauge. As long as you're going to have to do all that stuff anyway, it's just as easy to do 2 as it is 1. You can screw the holes into, I just drilled and tapped underneath the head, right where the normal sending unit would go. These things, you can get different eyes on them, small eye or big eye, it doesn't matter, but put it, I always figured that they positioned it where it was a good spot to have it. The engineers probably figured that out. So I probably would position them somewhere like that. And it's soft aluminum. You can position it wherever you want it to, where it's out of the way and doesn't get, hooked or whatever. But sure, 2 gauges, you wouldn't, in other words, 1 gauge tells you essentially what you need to know. 2 gauges is if you're playing with it and trying to watch everything and, trying to see if there's a disparity between the 2 heads. If you've done all the things like the carburetor balancing, don't have exhaust restrictions, then and don't have any air leaks and stuff, then the head should be the same. So 1 head should be one cylinder temperature gauge should be adequate.
Okay. And I'll take a last couple questions here around technology, new technology. Someone mentioned there may be a new type of thermostat available to attach to the rear doors. Are you familiar with them?
I'm sorry, I am not.
Okay.
Have you seen that, Scott? No, Scott hadn't seen it either.
Okay, and there was another one here about any experience with Kevin Nash's redesigned fan. New stuff. Kevin Nash.
No.
Is he a basketball player? Oh no, that's Steve Nash. Okay.
I don't know if that's entirely possible. The idea would be just like the Chevy did. They were trying to figure out something to get more horsepower and not wear the belts out and get away from that mini flywheel that those early steel fans were. So somebody else that's even got a better idea. One of the things they tried, and everybody's probably read about that, was that one of the fans that they originally came up with was made out of plastic. It was not a nylon. It was a plastic fan. And they put that on one of the early ones. But then back then, the batteries were all vented, had vented caps on it. And when the generator would go to full charge, like if it had all the lights on and everything running, the battery gas would escape out of there and little tiny drops would migrate into the fan and it turned it into formaldehyde, which wasn't good. So they abandoned that pretty quick.
Technology.
But if there's a new fan design and it works better, I'm sure that build a better mousetrap and somebody will buy it.
Well, I think what you said earlier, Mike, is great advice that there's lots of places people can go with these kind of questions. The forum, there's Facebook groups, and then I'll make a plug for the clubs. Your
Sure.
local clubs have a lot of people in them that have experience, that probably have a lot of knowledge. And then I'll say it again, we got a lot of great publications available in CORSA that you can also turn to. But the community of Corvair people help each other out, right? And
Yes,
that's what Mike is doing right here tonight. So I'm going to end by saying thank you, Mike Dawson, for volunteering